Welcome to the documentary on the French Revolution. We'll be going into the main things that happened around 1789 and 1793, but maybe going into a bit of what happened beforehand and after. And the system of governing in France at the time was there was three main estates. There was the third estate, which was the bottom one, which consisted of the peasants, the middle class, most normal average people. Then there was the clergy, which was the people in the church. Then there was the nobility entitled, which was the top class, which the king was in. In 1789, when King Louis XVI was on the throne of France, he was quite an extravagant king with a palace, and most kings then had a palace, but with a very grand palace in Versailles. And the reason why the French Revolution happened was France was bankrupt. It had spent all its money in the US Wars of Independence because they really hated the British then. Because France was bankrupt, there was a bit of a stir, people wanting a better France. So King Louis XVI called a National Assembly where a person representing each of the three estates, to vote on whether to change the system. And because the peasants were the people paying the things to the other two estates, and they were the rich ones, and they all three had equal votes, they voted to keep the system the same. And this assembly had only last been called in 1614. And the thing is, there's three people with all equal votes, and the person representing the third estate actually was representing 98% of the population, which is a bit unfair. Very. The middle class in the third estate and the peasants and a lot of people in the third estate were angry with what had been happening in France. They decided that they would call their own National Assembly, and the only place to have all the most important people in the third estate fit into one place was a tennis court. Just around the corner from the Palace of Versailles, you can still see the tennis court today. There's statues of all the most important people. Like one of them was Robespierre, all in the tennis court, making an agreement that they would all stick together until they got a fairer France, fairer for the third estate, and strip the king from his powers. Although some of them wanted to get rid of the king entirely. The French Revolution was about to begin. Peasants began to storm the Bastille. Which was a castle, a fortified monument, which had prisoners, which were kept there to keep Louis in. They were sent there if they spoke out against Louis the XVI. They stormed the Bastille with a huge army of peasants, mainly to get the weapons inside, because at that point there was only 7 prisoners inside. 2 of them was mad. One of them was sent there because he thought it was Julius Caesar. But when they stormed the Bastille, it was a huge monument of the king's power, and that the king, he was dictator, basically, of the country. It was the monument that showed his. And even now they celebrate the storming of the Bastille in France on the anniversary. After the storming of the Bastille and freeing the 7 prisoners, and the chap who thought he was Julius Caesar, it was the beginning of the French Revolution. Many nobles, not peasants, the peasants were the people storming the Bastille, many nobles fled in fright of this, and Louis XVI agreed that he would help the people get their goals, which is a bit surprising of the king of the time, but yep, they did it. A constitution that was drafted by an American founding father who the French had helped make the United States, helped draft the Constitution, the Declaration of the Rights of Man, which said basically everyone's equal, everyone's on equal ground, although really they didn't exactly let women vote though, and they weren't fair to them in that exact sense, so they weren't making everything 100% equal, but it was a big step from what it was beforehand. The French form a republic in 1789, I think, which was a democracy. Well, only men could vote though, which, yeah. And it was pretty, yeah, and after this, they formed a republic with fair voting, well, not fair voting, but with voting, which was a big step and spread fear around Europe because people were about losing their power, basically. Marie Antoinette, the Queen of France, persuades Louis XVI to take big action. They disguise themselves as normal people from the middle class and try to travel down to the border with Austria to take sympathetic troops in to reclaim France. As Marie Antoinette, as I was saying, she wasn't exactly the bad one. She was just was against what they were doing and tried to get herself a better public image during the revolution by, for instance, educating some children with her money, which didn't work because the French Revolution happened, so she didn't stop it, but yeah. When they arrive at a city near the border to stop for the night, a postman notices and recognizes the face of the Queen and the King because he'd seen them on money. And then they discover that it was the Queen and the King travelling to the border with Austria to take troops back into France to reclaim it. Then they were brought back to Paris and executed. Well, Louis XVI was. Louis XVI was executed with close, but in the reign of whether he was guilty or innocent, 93% of the people in the Republic voted for him to be guilty, but with only a close call of 6% did they vote for him to get the guillotine, which was when Robespierre, who was beforehand against the death penalty, changed his mind and decided that to save the French Republic, he would vote to give Louis the guillotine. After Louis got the guillotine, the Reign of Terror began, which was when Robespierre, after making one exception to vote for Louis XVI to get the guillotine, became paranoid with getting every single person, well, a lot of people executed. Because one exception, well, as soon as you get to one exception, you're thinking, well, where do I draw the line? Because as soon as you get to one exception, then this is an exception, this is an exception, and every time is an exception. So he basically became a dictator and had all the power gone to his head. Who knows? After the rumours of a dictator, Robespierre, people attacked him and took him. When they attacked him, Robespierre tried to shoot himself, but missed. And he was taken down and he was dealt the death that was given to many others of his victims. He was given the guillotine. Many European countries, in disgrace and in surprise at what had happened in France, allied together to take down the French Republic and reinstate the royal family. Although the Reign of Terror had quickly, after it began, taken Marie Antoinette, they still wanted to reinforce the monarchy. After this, in shock, George III, the current King of Great Britain, joined, and after a naval attack stopped by Napoleon Bonaparte, failing to get France under control, or what they thought was control, they stopped and the French went back to what they were doing, basically. Napoleon, the general who stopped the British when they were attacking, rose as the dictator of France after later on declaring himself emperor. This meant that although it meant an end to the French Republic, it was still slightly fairer for the peasants. Napoleon, after crowning himself emperor, went on to becoming one of the most successful war leaders in the history of the world, and he is now compared with his battle tactics to Genghis Khan and many people who led huge empires in battle. He expanded France among huge empire and became Napoleon, but eventually fell with the end of the Napoleonic Wars, and they put back a royal family in, which lasted 15 years until a second revolution happened. To this day, French people still celebrate the revolution and Bastille Day with marches and firework displays. Even the Eiffel Tower was built 100 years in commemoration of the revolution. France returned to the ideas of democracy, but yeah. And now even the hats that they wore during the revolution are still worn in most campaigns in France today. Even the French flag came out of the revolution because the white in the middle used to represent the king, and the blue and the red used to represent Paris, and it still does, I think. And it was a compromise between the two, showing that there could be a compromise, which there wasn't because the king was executed. Afterwards, the French Revolution laid the road for all future revolutions, or most of them. In the Revolution of Russia, when the Soviets took over, Lenin took the idea of the Reign of Terror from French Revolution. And he even put up statues of people from the French Revolution in Moscow.